Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. So good to see all of you. My name is Cynthia Thompson. In my day job, I'm Chief Development Officer with Big Brothers Big Sisters. And once again, I am so thrilled and honored to serve as your president for 2019, the president of the AFP Oregon and Southwest Washington chapter. And I hope you feel it's all been a great year at AFP. Locally, we are 177 members strong. Nationally, we have 31,000 members in 240 chapters. So in addition to our local programming, like today's luncheon, members have access to many exciting new benefits this year. So I hope you'll consider joining if you're not a member. Can we get a show of hands of who is an AFP member today? Who is a member? Great, thank you. I'd also like to point out that we have several scholarships available, some great scholarships, and all the information is on our website. And I wanted to point out that October 30th is our deadline for 2 scholarships that are related to our international conference that happens every year in the spring. So October 30th, there's 2 great scholarships to apply for. One is a diversity related, one is general related, but it covers all the expenses related to the 2020 international conference. So one of my main roles is to acknowledge and thank all of our sponsors and our supporters. So first off, I would like to thank Donor Search for sponsoring last month's happy hour at the Nightwood Society. Thank you for letting me get in that comment. Thank you. Wanted to thank you for that, Mark. Secondly, I want to give a big thank you to Rose City Philanthropic. They sponsor the live streaming of our programs year-round, and that allows our membership programming to be accessible to people in the outlining area. And we have a representative today, Rose City Philanthropy, Jerry. You'll be hearing from her. Thank you. And finally, I'd like to thank OSU Foundation for sponsoring this exciting program today with the Reser family. And it's kind of connected to their premier sponsorship of AFP, our chapter year-round. You'll see them highlighted next month at the conference, the National Philanthropy Awards Luncheon. So before I hand it over to Denise Harrison from OSU Foundation, I actually like to read a few comments from a LinkedIn article that we published last year about the Reser family when they won the award last year, the corporate award. And I haven't had a chance to share it with anyone, and I wanted to do it since you all were here today. It was our most popular social media post ever, and that's a lot for AFP. It still has that title. It got, I'll read these out, 558 views and 51 views from people who worked at Reser's Fine Foods, 16 reshares, 11 comments, and 250 reactions. So if you work for a big organization, that's probably, oh, that's tiny. But for us, AFP, that was huge. And so the comments were so great. I want to share some of them in case you know them. So from Tracy Landman, she said, yes, they are a recipe for success. From Deborah Thompson, best company to work for, I miss being there. From Jay Johnson, why isn't this the norm? These are excellent people. From Chris Kennett, I loved working with this company that displays incredible integrity in all that they do. From Vincent Cantanzano, world-class organization. Do you know any of these names? Just curious? From Ben Minicino, such a wonderful organization of caring people. And from Tamara Fowler, one of the best companies in the business. Wonderful people from the bottom all the way to the top. So I thought that was pretty incredible that you had those many comments from people. So we're so excited, we're delighted to hear from you today. And Denise Harrison will give the official introduction, and I'll welcome her to the podium now. Thank you.
To get this up a little bit higher than Cynthia. Well, thank you, and thanks for coming again today. We're really excited to have everyone here. I'm Denise Harrison. I'm with the OSU Foundation, and I have the distinct role of working on scholarships all across the university and raising money for other programs that support students. And I'm also on the board with AFP this year. I'm co-chair of our upcoming Philanthropy Awards, which is Tuesday, November 12th. So if you've not bought your tickets, and then of course the sponsorship deadline is looming, please see myself or Elizabeth in the back there there she is, thank you, to learn more about our event coming up next month. And of course, we're the presenting sponsor of that event, and we're so delighted to be able to do that. OSU Foundation is really appreciative of everyone's role in philanthropy. And today I'm here to introduce our distinguished panel. So Pat, Nikki, and Zack are, of course, all proud Oregon State alumni, I have to add. Go Beavs. It is homecoming, after all, for any of us that are heading to Corvallis after lunch. So the Reser family shares their affinity and support with so many deserving organizations and communities across the state of Oregon. The Reser Family Foundation was formed to honor the legacy of their family values and community involvement that was cherished by the entire family. The foundation was founded by Pat and her late husband Al and awarded their first grants back in 2011. And now today, Pat, along with her children and grandchildren, guide the work of the foundation. They partner with diverse organizations across Oregon to strengthen people and places that make our state so unique and inspiring. And together with their grant recipients, the Reser Family Foundation lends support across 4 key areas, broadly strengthening our state in health, education, arts, and the environment. So please join me in welcoming Pat, Nikki, and Zack for what's sure to be an enlightening panel discussion today. And I'll welcome my colleague Jerry Alcock up to talk us through how the panel presentation is going to work.
Okay, so thank you, Denise. Thank you. So I'm Jerry Alcock, Rose City Philanthropy, and I have the privilege today of facilitating our panel. And before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. Cynthia mentioned we are live streaming today. So we're going to ask you to hold your questions to the end, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions at the end. And I'll repeat your question into the mic from the podium, just so that everyone who's joining us remotely can join along. Okay, I'm going to pass the mic to you guys. When we started thinking about putting this program together, I'll just share that I reached out to our friends at Oregon Community Foundation, and immediately they said, there's one family you should talk with. There's a family that's really doing this right, and I think you'd be interested to hear their story about succession planning in their foundation. And so I was so thrilled that you agreed to join us. And so I think, Pat, for those who aren't familiar with your foundation, or your founding story, I should say, would you be willing to just to share the inspiration that and the early thinking when you founded the foundation with Al?
Sure. By the way, thank you all for being here. We're delighted to be able to be part of the Oregon Story and AFP. So thank you for being here. We actually signed the paperwork for a foundation in 1996. Last century. Kind of throws your mind a little bit, doesn't it? But Al and I continued to make the major decisions. If it was a business decision, he would make it. If it was beyond business, he and I would make it. After he passed away, I thought, I've got to do something that's different. I wanted to kind of put some structure into a foundation. I wanted the family to buy into the operations of an organization and not just hear from one parent or another that something sounded pretty good, so let's do that. So after he passed away, and I think this story is really important, and which is why I'm giving you this much detail, I felt a just lack of rudder in our family, so I called a family meeting and I said, I want everyone here, grandkids and all. The youngest was 5. So we were all gathered together, and I talked to them about, where are we going and how will we know when we get there? What are the mileposts along the way? What is it we want to do? And so we went through a process that I call hopes and dreams. I asked everybody, what are your hopes and dreams for you as a member of the Reser family and for us as a family. And I had prepped them before, telling them that this is what I was going to lead off with. So they did come a little bit prepared. So we did that, and I had paper around the room, and I jotted down everything, and everybody had a voice in what they wanted, either for themselves or for our family. And then the next question was, well, what do we have going for us? What are our strengths and interests? Same kind of thing. Then I asked the question, what are our fears and nightmares? And I thought there might be a variety of things. Well, now that Dad's gone or Grandpa's gone, what's going to happen to the business, those kinds of things. Not a word of that at all. Their concerns were like everybody else's concerns. Parents wanting the best for their kids, wanting to make sure they would make good decisions, and so forth. So then the question becomes, or before we got to that point, I gave each of them 13 little red dots, you know, the kind of dots you see in a gallery when a sale is made of a painting. And I asked them to put 5 dots, or use 5 of the dots for the 5 most important hopes and dreams to them, 5 on the strengths and interests. And because there were so few fears and nightmares, 3. They didn't need more than that. And out of that process came 3 very obvious goals. Now, I'm sure with some of the younger children, they may have thought, oh, there are a lot of dots here, so maybe I should put my dot there too. You know, come on, the youngest was 5. And so, but out of that came 3 top goals for our family, which was, no matter what road anyone might take in their life's journey, we would always stick together. Because I had talked about right now we're all in Oregon except for Auntie Mindy, but that may not always be the case. The second was we always want to learn, lifelong learning. I think they saw Grandma go back to school and a few other things, so lifelong learning came up. And then the third was always giving back to the communities in which we lived and worked. Well, there came my marching orders. That was the foundation for it was the foundation for our foundation as it exists today, because it let me know that the family was in full support of this idea. I spent a year going on all kinds of websites and finding out, what do their applications look like? What do they support? Where does their money come from? What kinds of awards do they give? What are their values? And probably 3 or 4 years before that time, I was given by a friend from Oregon State this book called Wealth in Families. At the time, I put it on the shelf, but it just seemed to me, I knew where it was, and I went, and you can tell by the dog-eared look and the number of stickies, I used it very much in the development. So that's the story of our founding. And I know that Nikki and Zack were both part of that group.
Nikki or Zack, do you want to add anything to that? What were some of your earliest challenges as a new foundation?
How do you go about it? We developed we had a family meeting and talked about how broad-based is this going to be geographically, how broad-based in terms of what we call pillars, and we made the decision at the time to primarily focus on the state of Oregon. But we used the word primarily in Oregon because I did have a daughter living in Mexico at the time, and I could foresee that other family members might live in other states, and we'd always want them to feel very much a part of their community. And then you want to develop discernment. You know, how do you read a grant application? I was in education for 20 years, and there's certain language that you use. Oh, so-and-so is really is enjoying life and is very much an active person, and so you read between the lines and you know, okay, that kid has a hard time sitting still in school. So, you know, there are subtle languages, and so we had to learn, what does that mean? How does that work? So we came up with a design, and we chose the 4 pillars: education, the arts, the environment, and health. Well, if you look at that, that covers everything. And so how do we develop discernment? But we started full screen, and I wanted everybody to go through processes in order to figure out how best to do it. So at some point, we gave every family $10,000. Here's our format. Here's our application process. As a family, you decide on some organization that you would like to use as our beta test for our process. We're not going to do site visits. Your word is sufficient. And we did that the first round. And each family made a decision, and we began to get better at discernment. And over time, we've narrowed not the number or focuses of the pillars, but what part of health do we look at? How much of the arts? What kind of environment are we talking about, and so forth?
That is great background. So moving into today, the National Center for Philanthropy reports that 50% of foundations are reporting that succession is their biggest challenge. So we'd love to hear how you're thinking about that and what you're planning.
I'm part of that 50%. I'll say that right out front. We started doing summits. Every 3 years, we have a summit for the board members. And we go through a review of what our goals are, our values, and so forth, and have made tweaks along the way. But I need to back up a little bit. Keep in mind that when we started, it took us about a year to get it all done. So now we have a 6-year-old and on up. But we decided we wanted a junior board, and this was not just going to be an adult thing. So the junior board, Nikki, I'm going to have you describe the process you took them through.
Okay, well, being the oldest of, 14 grandchildren, I kind of led this process. We got together as a group and had a big whiteboard, and kind of all similar to our big family gathering, put some of our areas of interest that were special to us up on. I think we had probably 20 up there, and much like our family meeting, each person went up and put their top 3 next to the ideas that meant the most to them. And then we came up with kind of a collective list of probably 10 or so that really hit home, that fell within the arts environment, et cetera. And every year as a junior board we meet, and we try to give our time and our money to a different area that fell within, or falls within those 10 top needs or focuses for our group. So those are our kind of our basis for a starting point every year. But then every person comes up with multiple foundations, ideas, in giving their time and our money. So do you want to add anything to that?
Another thing I'd like to add is at these meetings, we have a financial consultant come in, and it's really, really important to see kind of how that financial aspect works with how the money's invested. And then the biggest question that we all ask ourselves is, hey, where do we see our future? And obviously the goal of this foundation is perpetuity, and if there's no assets, there can't be perpetuity. So it's really important from a financial aspect to learn from the financial service consultant that comes in and educates us along with the senior board.
So you've added the junior board. Is your original board look different than when you first formed? How has that evolved?
It looks basically the same. What we wanted to do, or what I wanted to do, is get the entire family together. I felt the Family Foundation was a way that even if you didn't work for the company, certainly some of our grandchildren work for the company, but the expectation is we're not a family employment service. Therefore, they need to find what really excites them and live their life. But the foundation would be a way that we can always stay and meet that desire to care about one another. And so we do have all of the, well, I have to mention Mindy lives in Mexico again, so she's not actively part of it, but we keep her informed. So the other four children of mine, Al's and mine, and their spouses are part of the trustees, the board of directors. And then we have two others who have expertise in having served on many other boards and financial expertise, because we felt that was something that we didn't have within our own circle. And then my husband, Bill, has joined the board. Our junior board is made up of all of the grandkids. And fortunately, at this point, they pretty much all live in this area. And we just started with the oldest and moved down the line. You're chair of the junior board for this year, and then she or he would coach the next years and so forth. We gave the junior board a budget, and using the format that Nikki had described, they come up with their choice, but it can't just be writing a check. It has to involve some kind of presence, playing with, doing for, getting something. I think my very favorite story of the junior board is what happened at David Douglas. They decided, on that list that Nikki mentioned, they decided that food was an important factor because they all knew some friends of theirs who were on free and reduced lunch. So contact was made. I might mention that there is an executive director, Mary Jo, who's everybody's Mary Poppins, okay? She's everywhere and she does everything. So Mary Jo also is the guidance for the junior board. And so she did the research for the free and reduced lunches. Do you want to describe?
This was actually our very first giving experience, and so it was the year that I was leading it. So as Grandma was about to say, we did a statewide search, or maybe Portland metro area, of the highest free and reduced lunch percentage in that school, and we just basically went off the highest number, and that happened to be David Douglas. And we did two things. We went shopping and all together as a junior board and brought this food to their high school where we started a food pantry. And lo and behold, I mean, we knew it would impact and help maybe a year's worth, or we didn't really know what that was going to look like. But since then, it is a food pantry that still continues, and a DECA program took it over. And I think that's something that's really special just about that particular experience, having it being our first. You know, we don't know exactly what the impact is. We hope, and when foundations write grants and all of that, we ask that we are able to see some sort of measurable outcome. And this is something that has continued now, gosh, 9 years, or yeah, probably 9 years. And for a high school that's, you know, having struggles in certain areas, I think that's huge, and we're very proud to be a part of that experience. And
And I mention that because you never know when something is going to serve as a catalyst. And out of that program that started became, first of all, I'll mention there are a lot of second languages in that community. And so the high school students volunteered to serve as interpreters. And it's now an application process because it's such a valued position to serve as interpreters. Metropolitan Family Services has put an office there. Oregon Food Bank delivers fresh food and vegetables, fruit and vegetables on Thursdays. So the whole idea is be aware of what you can do and have it serve as a catalyst.
So what's been some of the challenges or the biggest challenge in terms of bringing the new generations into the foundation?
I think one of the challenges is as long as they're going to school, you've got kind of a captive audience, but then they get jobs. And it doesn't necessarily lend itself to that kind of involvement. So right now, the chair of the junior board is a junior at Linfield. And so we've got three more who can chair before we recycle back into Nikki. But the challenge is, I don't see it as a challenge so much as a plan to encourage the young people to serve on other boards to learn. What is it like to serve on another board that's not a family board? What kinds of responsibilities might there be that are different from a family board? The comment that Zack made about understanding the finances is important. So we want them to be educated in that respect. We want them also, I want them very much to develop the sense of compassion. How do you relate to other people? And one thing I am so thankful for this book was the description of 4 different kinds of wealth. There's intellectual wealth, everything that you've learned, your values, everything that you've become, your human wealth, how you've learned as a family to solve problems, attack issues, mentor one another, social wealth, how do you connect to your community? And then there's financial capital wealth. So even though our primary job is to provide the grants for as many opportunities as we can, we will buy a table at an event and then invite 4 different organizations that have similar kinds of services to sit at that table, talk to one another, learn from each other. This is a nightmare for us. How did you solve this? You know, that kind of thing. So we look at that as much as we can't just be an ATM machine.
So I have a question for Zack and Nicole. Has there been anything that surprised you about foundation operations or the foundation world since you've come into it?
Yeah, say from a young age, there's a lot more to it than just writing a check, like Grandma was saying. When I say a lot more, I mean a good thing by that. And that's us going out and helping in the community while donating to them. And so I guess from just a procedure standpoint, there's a lot more to it than just giving money back.
I mean, yeah, just to go on top of that, I think just the pure need in the community. When you're young, I don't think you realize what's out there, and we have been so fortunate as a family to be able to go to school and have, you know, a home over, you know, a roof over our head and nice meals to eat, but we don't realize what's lacking in the community. So I think it's been a really big growth opportunity for all of us younger generations to come together and figure out how we can help support others and give them the opportunities or push them in the direction that we were given.
Great. So Pat, do you see a difference in how the younger generation approaches their role in philanthropy?
Well, what they're asking for is, can we have more money and do more things? They came up with a great idea. They wanted to provide a scholarship, and but they didn't want it to be a one-year scholarship. I set up a one-year scholarship. My 5 children all graduated from Aloha High School, so they did the M5 scholarship. They're all, initials are all M. And so they've got the M5 scholarship at Aloha. The junior board said, we don't think that's right. We think it should be a 4-year scholarship. So we are planning on that, and we invited them to do the math, that, okay, year 1 is 4, and then they want to give another the next year, so that's, and these are $5,000 scholarships. So next year it's going to be 10, so, okay, do the math, and are you ready for that? And of course they think they are, which is good. And it was a realistic thought process that just you get these scholarships for year 1, but what happens the next year? You have to go and drum it up again. So wouldn't it be better to put more thought into the choice of the first and then guarantee that it would be there as long as they're attending school and getting a reasonable grade?
And also along the lines of the 4 years is, someone has success in 1 year, we'd love to help out and reward them in year 2, year 3, and year 4. Obviously, everyone here knows how expensive education is. So we're like, it's not fair for them to get a grant in 1 year and then have to go find this money somewhere else. So if we can help them out for 4 years in a row, hopefully we can take a burden off them and help them excel in their career after college or secondary education.
I think the audience approves that message. So how do you balance your roles as board members with being part of a family? I'm sure family dynamics crop up sometimes.
They sure do. But we agree to consensus. You may not feel that well, let me backtrack a bit. We have an advisory board, and every family has a member on the advisory board. So when we do the culling, the first round, it's the advisory board that does the heavy duty arguing. Does that really match our principles? Is that, do they have enough questions? I want to know more about this, and so forth. And of course, we get at least 4 times more applications than we can fund. And I think for a young organization, we do a really good job of funding. We operate on the 5%. At this point, we have about $40 million in our accounts. And so we give out, you can do the math, you know what we do on an annual basis. So there's this first round, and sometimes we don't agree, and other times we just agree to disagree. And we say, okay, let's do a site visit and ask these hard questions and let them make the decision, let them tell us, and then we can make the decision after that. Once we've done that round, then we take it back to the board, full board, and ask them, we go, well, it's so complicated, it's hard to describe it just in a short time. But we have 3 kinds of grants. We have what we call the fast track, and that's up to a $12,500 value or dollar request. And if they meet the criteria that we have, we do a quick yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Then we have $12.50 to $50,000. And that would require a site visit with more questions asked. That information is brought back to the advisory committee before we take it to the full board. Then we have the Small Community Initiative, which is a separate thing. And small communities within the state are invited to apply, and it would be 3 or 4 consecutive years of $10,000 each with support. Mary Jo now has a half-time support person, Lacey, and so Lacey is the support person. You need to do this, but we don't know how to do that. Lacey's there to help you do that, whatever it is. And so we provide the monetary support and the intellectual community support. And then we have a $100,000 grant also, which is a larger grant and with much more depth there. So, forgot what your original question was. But nonetheless, we have site visits. There are 2 or 3 times that we go through it, and then the board makes the final decision. And we have arguments sometimes, and it's okay. We just agree that once a majority rule, then consensus, and we support it.
Since we're talking a little bit about the mechanics of how you make grants, do you have what is your biggest piece of advice for a group that may be approaching you with a request?
Go on the website and read. Because we've revised our text several times to be more clear. If you were applying under the arts, make sure that you fit what we say we will support. And once in a while, someone will say, it fits here and it fits there. Then make the phone call and say, okay, I've read this, and don't ask us to make the decision for you. But if you've done your homework, you say, I match here and I match there. And sometimes we make a suggestion, you really would be wiser to go in this direction. But we've really worked hard and revised our website many times or several times, to make it as easy as possible to know what it is we're looking for.
Another thing that I think we've all feel very strongly about, and that I may have mentioned earlier, is that we want these organizations to be sustainable, and that's something that's really important to our family. So, you know, is what you're asking for going to be sustainable in the future, and, you know, how are you looking to grow that in addition to what our family can provide?
And that's a good point, Nikki, too, because sometimes we will feel so strongly about someone's application that we say, we will give you X for 3 consecutive years, which will allow you time to go and build other relationships with foundations so that you can sustain that.
So you have talked a little bit about the foundation existing in perpetuity. Do you foresee a time when the foundation would not be under control of the family, or why is it important to keep it in the family?
Sorry, I didn't turn my phone off. The harp is ringing over there. It will only ring 3 times. Since part of my goal in establishing the structure of the family, of the foundation, was to give the family purpose of being together. So I have no issue with having other members on the family if they can add value, on the board, if they can add value to the family's understanding of being good stewards of a foundation. But my desire would be to have it primarily family. Mm-hmm. And there are enough of us that shouldn't be a problem.
And is that something you would agree with, Nikki and Zack?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think Grandma would agree. It's hard to put a succession plan in order right now. We have a wide range. I mean, I'm the oldest, 33, with 2 young children, down to the youngest who's still in middle school. So it's hard to know what that will look like, and maybe our parents will step up, you know, when Grandma decides she's ready to pass the reins. But I think we all feel very strongly about keeping it in the family, but are also open if other people can add value to let that in.
One thing that comes to mind on this question for me is legacy, and that's something that my grandmother has started, and personally I'd love to carry on that legacy and keep it within the family and then eventually pass it down to my children. I don't have children yet, but I know someday I will and wish to. And then the second thing from my perspective is the ultimate currency in life is joy, and I really didn't understand that until I started doing this type of stuff with my grandmother and being a part of the foundation. And so those are the two things that really stick out to me on this.
That's great. Do you foresee a time when you would revisit the mission or those 4 pillars?
We have revisited the 4 pillars, but only to get a better sense of what does it mean. In education, the conversation among the family members is it seems that in middle school, that age is one of the more vulnerable ages, and so if we can focus on our education support in the middle school years, then hopefully students will move into high school and feel connected and see the value of education. So that's one area. In the arts, we look at the arts as providing community value, and then also arts as joy for life. And so looking at those who are disenfranchised with life and the role arts can play to support them, or chronically ill and the arts can support them. So we've done some refinement. Health is so broad. I mean, where do you go? So we look at, from children's standpoint, to just enhance life as opposed to find cures. That's not our job. But we've been in support. Well, why don't you mention Chelsea? Chelsea Hicks.
Oh yeah. Gosh, this was another early on giving experience for the junior board. We gave to the Chelsea Hicks Foundation, and short story behind that was a young 5 or younger year old little girl was diagnosed with a very rare form of brain cancer, and they were battling that, and she loved to play dress up, and so they had developed this they used to bring in all sorts of, costumes and dress up things for her while she would be going through radiation and chemo, and since that 2-year time period when she was diagnosed, lost her battle, and so they started this wonderful traveling closet that goes around to the two children's oncology wards here, and they allow them to dress up and play and have fun because they are kids, and they don't know what life is about right now.
So this is a question for Nikki and Zack. Do you have advice for other millennials who are looking at eventually taking up the role of family philanthropy? What would you tell them?
The one thing that stands out to me, and I mentioned it earlier, is the financial aspect. The question we always ask ourselves as a junior board, what does the future look like? And so having that financial consultant come in and educate us on things we can help in our personal lives, but also with the foundation, is really important. So from an advice standpoint, I think having the financial advice from somebody that's an expert in that field is really important.
And I think just be open-minded. I know as we're all our own individuals and we all have our own ideas and areas where we want to give, but having conversations and being okay with not disagreement, but just talking things out and giving your time back. I think that's something that's really important to our junior board, is giving our time. So
Great. So we promised to take questions from the audience. I'm sure that we have some out there. If you've been sitting on a question, we'd love to hear it. Andy?
Thank you. I'm Andy Esposito with Oregon Coast Council of Guards, and we read any kind of publication about the current millennials and whether or not they're going to, what their trends are for giving. And so many of them have moved towards donor-advised funds rather than becoming intimately involved in actually the process. So I guess my question is to you, Nikki and Zach, because you are an inspiration, and so my question is how that feels for you being integrally involved rather than just doing the donor-advised funds. And then secondarily, Pat, have you considered taking your role model to other philanthropic families, because it's a wonderful role model?
Yeah, to touch on your first question, like I mentioned earlier, joy is the ultimate currency in life, and doing this, or instead of just writing a check and being a part of the organization, being able to give back time really exploited that for me. And so, gosh, yeah, I got to remember what your first part of your question was, but, oh, the donor. Yeah, so the joy is what is going to keep me involved in being a part of it instead of moving it to a donor-advised fund.
I think it's rewarding, first and foremost, and then kind of as we were raised, it's values that we want to instill in our children and younger generations to come. And I know, I feel, and we all feel very blessed to have such a incredible matriarch in our family and patriarch who passed away, but we're very lucky to have that to look up to and live up to in the future and then pass down to our children.
I'll get to your question in a minute, but one thing I have learned so much from working with other groups, it's like I was talking to Zack earlier today, when you're in school, you get the 101, 201, 301, 401, you graduate, and then it's 501. Life starts happening, and you can learn so much from how organizations pull together and how they've learned to do what they want to do, how individual people bring their expertise, their thought process, and it's just been a continual lifelong learning for me. And I was so delighted that lifelong learning was something that came out of the family group too. And then in regard to your question, I have about taking the model. I think every family has a certain DNA, if you will, and so if there's anything anyone can adapt from what I say or my experience as opposed to adopt, it's I think every family has its own DNA and it'll come together, but with some structural, and this was my structural base. Thank you.
Great. Next question. Don't be shy. I'm going to bring a mic over if you have a question. Okay, it's Diana. You're up.
So you've mentioned the possibility, but not very seriously yet, of adding one or more members to the board or advisory group or whatever who are not family members. What might you, this is speculative because you haven't decided to do this, but if you were going to do this, what might you like to add to the family?
I think I would, oh boy, that's a tough question, Diana. First of all, I think the family would have to see it because we kind of think of ourselves as a family foundation. And even though the two people who are not family members, one of them, he's kind of like my adopted son anyhow, because he's the same age as my kids. And I don't know how to answer that. What I would look for is the desire of the family to say we're at a position that we are maybe skiing over our skis and we need to get some more consulting or another board member who has more experience, perhaps. I don't know how else to answer that right now. I hope not.
Okay, we've got a question back here.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth with Friends of the Columbia Gorge, and we did receive our first grant from you this year, so thank you so very much. But I'm curious with the junior board, when an organization receives money, is there any way, are they notified that it's from the junior board, or do they receive a different notification? And also, does the senior board approve sort of the decisions of the junior board, or is junior board's autonomous?
The junior board is autonomous, but remember Mary Poppins is there. And so she won't let them go astray. And then if it were a junior board grant, they would know it. Yeah.
Okay, we have a question up front.
Mine is more curiosity and nosiness. So how about the in-laws? How do you fold in the spouses to all of this decision making? We've had that, Elizabeth's my sister, and whenever we have had a few occasions for big family wow pows, and there's a tension there, like, do you bring your partner, or is this really just the kids' decision or not? So how have you all weighed that?
The way we started is the children and their spouses. And so right now, the advisory board is primarily made up of the spouses and me. I just feel that it's a family unit, and so to say we and them is not a good idea. And so going forward, my children are going to have to figure that out for the next generation. But if these are joint decisions, and then going back to personal investment, each of the family members is a shareholder in our company. The company donates a percentage of the profits to the foundation. That means that amount is not available for them as shareholders. And so it's a vested interest of both. And how do you teach your children well, I'm sorry, you don't have a voice, but you do. That doesn't work, and I'm losing my necklace, but that's all right.
I think I saw a question up front. Okay. I'm just going to ask you to speak into the mic. Thanks.
My question has to do with, as you think about succession and future generations, you currently operate with your board and your children, your immediate children, which I think you said there were 5 that were involved currently at that level. But you have 14 grandchildren. And is the theory that the board continues to grow and grow, or does one child from each family succeed their parent on the adult board? Or how do you handle that as far as that future planning?
That's why I mentioned I'm in that 50% that hasn't quite figured out how they're going to go forward. There's this leadership from the grave kind of thing, or command from the grave. And I feel I would like to offer my suggestions, but allow each generation to make it work for them, so that my children can make the decisions how their kids are involved. And then the next generation will make the decision how their kids are involved. And, exponentially, that's got to get to be a huge number. But I think they'll figure it out. I'm counting on that. So I don't want to make the blueprint now and say this is what has to happen, because I don't know what's going to happen.
We're running down on time, but we do have time, I think, for another question or two. Okay, I'm on my way.
I love the stories. I'm Paul Carey with the Oregon 4-H Foundation as part of OSU. In your discernment process and looking at your pillars, any discussion or any current discussion on Oregon, urban versus rural, and the maybe dividing issues between the two, and certainly needs in both, but has that entered the landscape and entered the discussion?
Yes, it has. We have, in fact, we have a big map of the state of Oregon, and we have little push pins in, and we we pay attention. We cannot be Portland-centric or metro-centric, which is also why we have the small community grant. And we recently awarded a small community grant to Warrenton, and because they want to kind of revitalize with the big box stores being more on the highway. The town of Warrenton is feeling a little neglected, but there's this little core group that is so excited about working with Lacey and the fact that they got their grant accepted. So we are looking at making sure that we address needs all over. In the Wallowa area, there was a hospital that was no longer functionable as a hospital. It was too old and so forth, and so it was sold to a group for $100 or something like it, just some paper that they could sign that they received money for it. But they pulled together several services within the community, and we supported them because we look at impact. And so many of the smaller rural communities don't have scalable populations that can make things happen. And so if they can pull groups together and we can give them that leg up, we're very much aware of small communities. Yeah.
Is that it for questions? We've got one last question. I'm on my way.
Well, I've always been impressed, Pat, with the time that you seem to be able to conjure up. And I guess that's my question is, like, one of the challenges of engaging younger folks is they're just so busy with their families and their professions. And you know, it would be great if you just said, well, this is kind of a mandate, part of being the family. That'd be great if that was your answer. But, like, how do you balance the time commitment and stuff? Or Nikki, maybe you might be the person to answer this. I mean, how do you do that at this age? I just am, because it sounds like a pretty big time commitment, actually. I could be wrong, but maybe you could say how many hours a week it is or that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, from the junior board's perspective, we obviously do take into account that we have kids in all areas of life. We have some in college. I'm, you know, a mom raising 2 young kids. And so we get together collectively as a group probably twice a year. Our first is kind of our brainstorming period. Everybody brings their ideas about the foundations that they want to possibly give to that year. And at that session, we then make our decision, narrowing it down to 1 or 2 foundations that we're going to give to. And then we also decide on, well, I guess maybe not necessarily, but we, our Mary Poppins, reaches out to these foundations and asks for volunteer opportunities along with that, because that's something that we've decided was important to us. So not only then do we give the check, but then later in the year, usually December, we find a time as a group when kids are not in school. That's why December is a good time for us, that we go and do our donating of our time. So, I mean, yes, it's a time commitment. It's something we're proud and happy to do. And I mean, I guess Grandma's never said, well, you've got to do this because you're part of the family, but it's something that we want to do and that we're all very passionate about. So it doesn't seem like it's this obligation to us. I don't know if you want to add anything more, but.
I was going to say, usually in life, when you make something a priority, you find time for it. So like Nikki was saying, we both, actually the entire junior board loves what we do. So it's a priority to us, so we make time for it.
And the junior board is, it's a way for them to get to know each other and to learn from each other also, because they have these discussions that otherwise wouldn't happen.
Great. Well, we are at the top of the hour, so I want to thank you for your generous time today. And we have a little token to thank you, because chocolate is always a nice thing. There you go. Just briefly, I want to give a plug for our December session before we break. So in December, we'll be featuring James Greenfield, who's an author, nationally known author, who will be speaking on sexy data, using your giving data for faster, better, bigger results. And he's going to be presenting tools and metrics from the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. So this will be a special 2-hour session where he will talk about the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, how to submit your data, what the benchmarks of your peers, how to use those. And the second hour will be a practical application of that, where you can come with your own data or your questions and have discussion with peers around that. So do we have any other comments? Okay, then we're going to break. Thank you.